groups and foreign governments. Her name is Karen Hudes. She was senior counsel at the World Bank for 12 years before blowing the whistle. She's joining me now to talk about her experience and what it all means for the rest of us. I'm joined by Karen Hudes. Thank you so much for coming on, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
So could you briefly explain what the impetus was for you to speak out? What did you see?
I was a lawyer and I saw securities fraud. I saw financial information that was not being disclosed to $180 billion worth of bondholders. It was my job to make sure that the financial statements were correct. So first, I reported it up the corporate ladder to the audit committee. When that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Treasury Department. And when that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Congress. Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank saying, "Don't fire this lady." And they promptly fired me. This means that the U.S. Congress does not have the information that it needs. So they stuck with the problem. After I was fired, 3 senators asked for a GAO inquiry into the corruption that I was reporting at the World Bank. Senators Lugar, Leahy, and Bai.
Walk us through what exactly, where was this money being laundered, to whom?
The money was going every which way because anybody that reported misconduct was fired. So in one case, the borrowers were being overcharged. In another case, I was reporting corruption in the Philippines. $900 million worth of money that should have gone to fight poverty in the Philippines instead went to a corrupt man, Lucio Tan, who was in default on his loans. Philippine National Bank went into default. There was a run on the bank. Philippine National, the investment company tried to bail out the bank for $500 million. And then the board was lied to. And my story is about trying to uncover the cover-up. The cover-up went all the way to Congress, and then it went to 188 ministers of finance. So this is corruption in the entire world. And until it's set straight, what we're going to have is we're going to have a currency war.
So you think that this was just a microcosm of what's happening across the entire institution? You just saw one aspect of this kind of laundering.
It wasn't just me. There's a group of World Bank whistleblowers. There's one of us from the United Kingdom. There's one of us from Mexico. There's one of us from India. There's one of us from Ethiopia. And we're all reporting the same thing, corruption from top to bottom of that institution. The money's going every which way, but where it needs to go to fight poverty.
And so you said that you were kind of stifled. You went to the government and then you had a couple senators on your side, congresspeople. What of the corporate press? You said that you continuously tried to go to them with the story to cover it, and you were shunned as well.
Absolutely, and the reason why I found out, it's because the corporate press is owned by one mega conglomerate. All of the financial institutions in the world, just about, are part of this scheme to rip off everybody, every single citizen on this planet. That's what I'm talking about. And it's not just my idea. There was a very accurate report on this from the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. 3 mathematicians looked at accurate corporate data on 43,000 transnational companies, and they reported that through very clever interlocking corporate directors, these groups managed to grab 10 times the power than they otherwise had in their finances. So they own 40% of the assets of all of the companies traded on the capital markets of the world, and they own 60% of the earnings for every year. This means that the central banks for the world are issuing paper money with absolutely no accountability to the people who are using this money.
I mean, basically, there's no oversight over these institutions. Aside from laundering money, plainly, they're also laundering money offshore, hidden in these bank accounts, offshore bank accounts.
They're the ones that we hear about all the time. Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
You were talking about Bank of America. They are actually all one bank. That's what happened when we saw the LIBOR crisis. These institutions are one big conglomerate that think they control the world, and they think they're above the law, and they're not.
Up until Karen Hudes, it was only theory, so God bless you, Karen Hudes. Thank you so much for what you did. You had a lot of courage to do that, and I wish more people like her would come forward. At any rate, all that extra money to be inserted into the economy thanks to fractional reserve banking at the local levels and overborrowing or overprinting of the fiat currency at the federal levels as the workforce becomes ever more flooded with illegal immigrant workers, literally pouring over the borders, working for pennies on the dollar, while all the good, high-paying jobs are being shipped overseas to, ironically, Mexico and China and India as well. And this includes, essentially, our customer service jobs as well, which used to belong to Americans but now belong to anyone and everyone who doesn't know how to speak English or understand the meaning of the phrase "I'm in a hurry." It would seem that is a prerequisite to work in customer service these days. This is all sort of a side note, but I'm so tired of calling AT&T customer support only to be put on hold for 45 minutes and ultimately get on the phone with a person who barely speaks English and never, ever solves the issue which I originally called to resolve. But as the money supply is flooded, the job market is flooded, the housing market is flooded, the greedy corporate coffers are flooded with cash, which they hoard, and our egos as a general race are flooded at the top. Our minds are obviously flooded with lies that make all this anti-human psychology possible. Pretty pictures are beamed into the minds of astronomers, dazzling them with images from light years away. And at the same time, pretty pictures are dazzling and babysitting our children while mom and dad are off to work all day just to survive, then off to school for the children where the federal machine plops out carbon copies of Britney Spears drones thanks to their policy of teaching children to suck up information without question, do not think outside the pre-approved box, and regurgitate any and all information you have received on demand accurately. We've all been pre-programmed for consumerism and obedience since our very formative years. All the while, the true hidden powers of the world are dismantling the American economies and our constitutional rights, as well as dismantling physically the mountain ranges, like the beautiful, magical Blue Ridge Mountains, another terrible tragedy that needs to see some huge outcry from the quote-unquote green movement, which I submit was also subverted and co-opted by the quote globalists, just like any and all other righteous grassroots movements in our well-monitored, tightly controlled society, all the while having the weather-predicting ground-based radar technology and the weather-predicting pontificates of science and religion, Al Gore notwithstanding, tell us that we need to worry about things like global warming, cow farts affecting the atmosphere as Al Gore tools around in his private jet, with his Greenpeace sticker on the side of it, of course. And breathing too much is another thing we need to worry about. One thing I think a lot of people fail to remember is that, yes, we breathe out carbon dioxide, yet plants breathe in carbon dioxide, and therefore there is a symbiosis or a natural balance kept to the world as long as we keep enough plants around, which seems to me we're just destroying as much tropical rainforest as possible, as quickly as possible, which makes no sense whatsoever. Now, speaking of Al Gore tooling around in his personal jet with the Greenpeace sticker on it, while corporate jetliners are most likely using water fuel cells, just like all commercial jets, which cause the clouds to form behind the planes during certain barometric or dew point conditions. And these are not probably chemtrails spraying all over us coming from the backs of the planes. Chemtrailism, much like the belief in a spinning globe, is a fun and scary and spooky thing to think about. However, neither theory makes any sense when you know the facts in the matter. So like Tom Ogle or Stan Meyer or the Winnipeg carburetor are all search terms that you can kind of look up and have been known to run internal combustion engines on nothing more than water. And it makes a lot of sense that the clouds coming from the backs of jet planes are simply that, clouds, and are not chemtrails spraying all over everybody. If you look into this a little bit, I think you'll see that there is some validity to my theory that chemtrails are not chemtrails. They are simply clouds being formed due to the plane manufacturers using a minor modification to the carburetor of all internal combustion engines, which allow them to run on water, or water vapor more specifically. the subversive societal elites would much rather have us squabbling about what type of chemicals they're using on us rather than actually knowing the truth, which is they're getting all their fuel for free, just simply pumping water out of the lake. And all these expensive flights we've been paying for all these years are unwarranted, especially when you consider most airliner corporations were subsidized by tax dollars and so therefore should be the property of the people. But I digress yet again. All that tangent aside, if we were to truly stand still on the heliocentric Big Bang universe, it would be a wild experience indeed to see the Earth begin to spin away, then the sun begin to arch away, and then the galaxy begin to haul ass away, and then finally the infinite void of space would just surround you in every direction, which, thankfully, none of this exists. It only exists in the minds of misinformed theoretical physicists who have passed their false images of belief into your mind as well. I think it's important to mention that we've all sort of known inherently that when we stand still, like take in a breath of the still air around us, that we are extremely, utterly, obviously still. Being totally still and fully knowing it through and through, balls to bones, is a strange feeling to a person who has subconsciously believed or consciously known that their entire life, for every second which went by, was unique, in a sense that the next second will have traveled thousands of miles through space, just like every other second before or since. And the very place he stood during that second will never be stood upon again, since the Earth and the solar system have traveled millions of miles from that point in just a few hours. The path of the blue orb you've been watching in clips throughout this video was a compressed representation of the path a moon, similar to our hypothetical moon, would take if orbiting a planet similar to our hypothetical planet in the supposed conventional heliocentric model, which is orbiting a star allegedly similar to our sun, which is orbiting a galactic center similar to the theoretical Milky Way galaxy, with a theoretical supermassive black hole at the center of that, traveling through space over 1 million miles per hour. One thing I never understood is, how does a black hole warp or puncture in space-time travel at any rate? How can something be warped inward and punctured in at all directions travel? Wouldn't the dynamic tension of all that inward thrust equally from all directions cause the theoretical warp or puncture to remain immobile? Anyways, it's a moot point because infinite space does not exist, therefore galaxies do not exist, and therefore black holes don't exist, nor does dark matter exist. And the overpaid, degree-toting Ivy League apes at CERN, for example, are doing the Cowley's Dance of Destruction, but are searching for something that couldn't possibly theoretically exist, nor does it necessarily need to theoretically exist since gravity has been debunked. See, scientists believe in this thing called dark matter, which is what tethers distant bodies, say the non-existing planet Earth, and the sun, using nothing but seemingly empty space as a medium for the hypothetical tether, which causes us to be bound by orbital motion to the sun, perpetually falling around the sun at times, being attracted to the sun at other times, and repelled wildly away from the sun at other times, depending on the time of solar year, or depending on the sun's angle of attack around the galactic center in the hypothetical, theoretical, heliocentric model, which does not exist. Now, these scientists believe that dark matter or antimatter exists in a realm just beyond the veil of human perception or understanding. Now, I agree with them on that premise, but in a spiritual or metaphysical term, not in the physical idea of dark matter, anyways, because dark matter theoretically does not need to exist since gravity does not exist. Now, anyways, the galaxy with its inwardly compressed from all directions center, theoretically flying through space much faster than any of the smaller moving parts composing the nonsensical physics-defying galaxy, that depicts an astounding series of nonsensical curved lines and impossibly sharp angular turns and steep vectors of contradictory
worth of bondholders. It was my job to make sure that the financial statements were correct. So first, I reported it up the corporate ladder to the audit committee. When that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Treasury Department. And when that didn't work, I went to the U.S. Congress. Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank saying, "Don't fire this lady." And they promptly fired me. This means that the U.S. Congress does not have the information that it needs. So they stuck with the problem. After I was fired, 3 senators asked for a GAO inquiry into the corruption that I was reporting at the World Bank. Senators Lugar, Leahy, and Bai.
Walk us through what exactly, where was this money being laundered, to whom?
The money was going every which way because anybody that reported misconduct was fired. So in one case, the
Groups and foreign governments. Her name is Karen Hudes. She was senior counsel at the World Bank for 12 years before blowing the whistle. She's joining me now to talk about her experience and what it all means for the rest of us. I'm joined by Karen Hudes. Thank you so much for coming on, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
So could you briefly explain what the impetus was for you to speak out? What did you see?
I was a lawyer and I saw securities fraud. I saw financial information that was not being disclosed to $180 billion investment company tried to bail out the bank for $500 million, and then the board was lied to. And my story is about trying to uncover the cover-up. The cover-up went all the way to Congress, and then it went to 188 ministers of finance. So this is corruption in the entire world, and until it's set straight, what we're going to have is we're going to have a currency war. The borrowers were being overcharged. In another case, I was reporting corruption in the Philippines. $900 million worth of money that should have gone to fight poverty in the Philippines instead went to a corrupt man, Lucio Tan, who was in default on his loans. Philippine National Bank went into default. There was a run on the bank. The